She smirked about her business trip to Scottsdale. But her luggage GPS showed Miami. The client she claimed to meet? Never heard of her. My father-in-law thinks I just push paper. He has no idea I built Protocol 33C in every contract he signed. A kill switch that activates when family betrays family. My name is Thomas Sinclair. I'm 45 years old, and I've spent the last 12 years as the chief deal structuring specialist at Hampton Aviation Leasing, a company my father-in-law George built from nothing into a portfolio worth north of $300 million. We lease private jets to people who have more money than sense. Gulfstreams, Bombardiers, the kind of aircraft that cost more than most people's houses. My job? I design the contracts, the ownership trusts, the liability shields. I build the legal architecture that makes sure when something goes wrong at 40,000 feet, the lawyers can't touch the real money. People think I just push paper. Caroline certainly did. My wife, well, soon-to-be ex-wife, never understood what I actually do. To her, I was the quiet guy in the corner office who made sure the dotted lines got signed. She was the one out front, shaking hands, closing deals, director of business development. She brought in the clients. I made sure we kept them. We have a daughter, Isabella, 3 years old, with her mother's dark hair and, I hope, none of her mother's capacity for deception. That little girl is the only thing that kept me from walking out 6 months ago when I first started seeing the signs. Late-night texts, sudden business trips, a new attention to her appearance that wasn't for me. It was a Thursday morning when everything started. Caroline was packing for what she called a critical client meeting in Scottsdale. I'd already changed Isabella's diaper, made breakfast, and paid the landscaper before Caroline even came downstairs with her Toomey carry-on. She wore the charcoal Armani suit, the one with the fitted jacket that she saved for meetings where she needed to project authority. Her hair was pulled back tight, gold earrings catching the morning light. Everything about her screamed control, precision, power. "You want me to drive you to Teterboro?" I asked, loading the dishwasher. Teterboro was our local private airport, 20 minutes away. She barely looked up from her phone. "No need. Ryan's sending a car." Ryan Mitchell, aviation broker, one of our contractors who sourced aircraft for lease opportunities. I met him twice. Slick smile, expensive watch, the kind of handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long. "Big deal?" I asked. Caroline glanced at me with that look, the one that said I was asking questions above my pay grade. "We're looking at a G650 fleet expansion. Potential $20 million contract." She zipped her bag with a sharp motion. "Thomas, you wouldn't understand. This is how high-level business works." High-level business. She'd been using that phrase a lot lately. Like she'd discovered some secret language I wasn't sophisticated enough to speak. "How long?" I asked. 3 days. Maybe 4. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting her collar. "Don't call unless it's about Isabella. I'll be in back-to-back negotiations." I nodded. Watch her lean down to kiss our daughter, who was playing with blocks on the living room floor. Isabella grabbed her mother's hand, not wanting to let go. "Mama back soon, sweetheart," Caroline said, extracting herself. Then she turned to me, offered a dry kiss that landed somewhere near my cheek, and walked out. I stood at the window and watched the black Mercedes pull up. Watched my wife slide into the back seat without looking back. Watched the car disappear down our tree-lined street in Bernardsville. Then I walked into my study. Not the one Caroline knew about, the mahogany-paneled room with the law books and the framed diplomas. No, I went to the other one. The one behind the concealed door in the closet. The one that required a fingerprint scan and a 6-digit code only I knew. The monitors came to life. 3 screens displaying encrypted feeds, tracking systems, document repositories. Everything I'd built over the past 11 years. Everything Caroline had no idea existed. I opened the file labeled Protocol 33C, Contingency Framework. My phone buzzed. A text from my contact, David, former NSA analyst who now did private security work. Subject departed. Tracker active. Confirm next steps. I typed back one word. Proceed. Caroline thought she was flying to Scottsdale. The GPS tracker embedded in her luggage tag told a different story. She was heading to Miami. Not for business. For him. I closed my eyes and thought about Isabella, asleep upstairs. About the 7 years of marriage that were about to dissolve. About the empire my father-in-law built, not knowing I designed a fail-safe into every single contract, every trust, every corporate entity he controlled. Protocol 33C wasn't just a contingency plan. It was a scalpel, and Caroline had just put her neck on the operating table. Most people don't understand what I actually do. They hear deal structuring specialist and think I'm some glorified contract administrator. They're wrong. What I do is build fortresses out of paperwork. I create legal structures so complex that even the best attorneys need weeks to understand them. And buried deep inside those structures, invisible to everyone except me, are the kill switches. Protocol 33C started as a thought experiment 11 years ago, right after I married Caroline. Her father, George, had just brought me into the company, proud to have a lawyer in the family. We were at his estate in the Hamptons, celebrating the 4th of July. George had too much bourbon and started talking about succession planning, about keeping the business in the family, about protecting the legacy from outsiders. "You ever worry about divorce?" he asked me that night, cigar smoke curling between us. Half these wealthy families destroy themselves fighting over assets when marriages fall apart. I told him I'd never thought about it. That was a lie. I'd already started thinking about it. Not because I didn't trust Caroline. Back then I did. But because I'd spent 6 years studying corporate law, and I knew that trust was the worst foundation for financial security. "We should build in protections," George said. "Spousal conflict clauses, loyalty provisions, something that keeps the business intact if personal relationships deteriorate." He thought he was being clever. He had no idea he was handing me the blueprint. Over the next 3 years, I rebuilt Hampton Aviation's entire corporate structure. I created a web of trusts, holding companies, and operating entities spread across 5 jurisdictions. At the center was something I called the Hampton Family Continuity Trust, which held controlling interest in everything. George loved it, said it would protect the company from hostile takeovers and messy divorces. What George didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd embedded Protocol 33C into the trust documents. It was hidden in Section 18, Subsection F, Paragraph 7. 43 words that looked like standard conflict of interest language. But those 43 words gave me the power to freeze any family member's access to trust assets if their actions created material fiduciary risk to beneficiary interests. The trigger conditions were beautifully vague. Undisclosed relationships with company vendors. Misuse of corporate resources for personal benefit. Anything that could compromise the integrity of business operations. Caroline had just triggered all 3. I pulled up the tracking data. Her luggage was currently moving south on I-95, exactly as I predicted. Not toward any airport. Toward the Seta Hotel in Miami Beach, where Ryan Mitchell had checked in 2 days ago under his company's corporate account. My phone rang. "David, she just stopped at a rest area near Fort Lauderdale," he said. Switched her phone to airplane mode. "She's going dark." "Expected," I replied. "Stay on the luggage tracker. I want timestamps on everything." "You sure about this, Thomas?" "Once you activate the protocol." "I've been sure for 6 months." I ended the call. On my desk sat a photo from our wedding. Caroline in white, me in my tux, George beaming between us. We looked happy. Maybe we were, for a moment. Before she realized I wasn't impressive enough. Before I became the boring husband who stayed home with a baby while she traveled the world closing deals. I opened my laptop and began drafting the first notification. Not to Caroline, to the trust administrator in Delaware. 3 paragraphs, clinical and precise, invoking Protocol 33C based on preliminary evidence of fiduciary breach. Isabella called from upstairs. "Daddy, I'm awake." I saved the document and went to get my daughter. Some things were more important than revenge, but revenge could wait until bedtime. The thing about surveillance is that people always think they're smarter than the technology. Caroline had turned off location services on her phone, thinking that made her invisible. What she didn't know was that I'd embedded a secondary tracker in the lining of her favorite Toomey bag 3 months ago. Military-grade GPS, battery life of 6 weeks, completely undetectable unless you knew exactly where to look. By Friday evening, I had everything I needed. Photos of Caroline and Ryan entering the Seta Hotel separately, but within 10 minutes of each other. Time-stamped elevator footage showing them getting off on the same floor. Room service charges to Ryan's corporate card. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, chocolate-covered strawberries. The kind of details that turn suspicion into certainty. David sent me the final package at 8 p.m. while I was reading Isabella a bedtime story. I waited until she was asleep, her small hand curled around her stuffed elephant, before I returned to my office and opened the file. There was video. Short clips. Nothing explicit. I made it clear to David that I wanted evidence, not ammunition for blackmail. But there was enough. Caroline and Ryan walking on South Beach. His arm around her waist. Her laughing at something he said, touching his chest in a way she hadn't touched me in 2 years. The financial records were even more damning. Caroline had been charging personal expenses to the company for 6 months. Spa treatments in Chicago billed as client entertainment. A weekend in Napa Valley labeled as a vendor conference. Dinners at restaurants that were nowhere near any business meeting. She'd gotten sloppy. Arrogant. She thought nobody was paying attention. I opened the Protocol 33C master file and began the activation sequence. First, I needed to document the fiduciary breach. I created a report. Cold, factual, devastating. 23 pages detailing every falsified expense report, every undisclosed relationship with a company vendor, every violation of our corporate ethics policy. Then I drafted the formal notification to James Patterson, the trust administrator in Delaware. James was a former federal prosecutor who'd spent 30 years putting white-collar criminals in prison. He didn't have much tolerance for people who played games with fiduciary responsibilities. The email was short. James, pursuant to Protocol 33C, Section 18F, 7. I am formally notifying you of material fiduciary breach by Caroline Hampton Sinclair. Evidence attached. Requesting immediate freeze of beneficiary access, pending full board review. This action is consistent with trust provisions and requires no additional authorization. Regards, Thomas. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. Once I sent this, everything changed. The trust would freeze Caroline's access to funds. Her signature authority would be suspended. Her position at the company would become untenable. I thought about Isabella sleeping upstairs. About the life I'd built. About 7 years of marriage that had died somewhere between the business trips and the lies. I pressed send. The reply came back in 4 minutes. Received. Freeze implemented 2047 Eastern Standard Time. Board notification scheduled for Monday 9 o'clock. Documentation is thorough. This will hold up. JP. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself one small smile. Caroline was still in Miami, probably having drinks by the pool, completely unaware that her access to the family fortune had just evaporated. She wouldn't know until Monday morning when her credit card started declining. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the hard part, waiting for her to realize she'd walked into a trap she couldn't escape. Caroline came home Sunday evening like nothing had happened. I heard her car pull in the driveway around 7, right when I was giving Isabella her bath. She called up the stairs in that bright, false voice she used when she was performing happiness. I'm home. Where are my girls? Isabella squealed and tried to climb out of the tub. I wrapped her in a towel and carried her downstairs. Caroline was in the kitchen, unpacking her bag. She'd brought back a stuffed dolphin for Isabella, probably grabbed at the airport gift shop as an afterthought. How was Scottsdale? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She didn't even flinch. Exhausting. The negotiations went on forever, but we're close to finalizing the G650 fleet deal. Should be worth $25 million when it closes. She kissed Isabella on the forehead. Did you miss Mommy? I watch her perform. The loving mother. The dedicated executive. The faithful wife. Every word a lie delivered with practiced ease. Sounds productive, I said. Must have been intense if you couldn't even send a good night text to Isabella. A flash of irritation crossed her face. Thomas, I told you. Back-to-back negotiations. I barely had time to sleep. She pulled out her phone. Speaking of which, I need to respond to some emails. George wants a full briefing tomorrow morning. She disappeared into her home office. The real one, not the hidden one she didn't know existed. I finished getting Isabella ready for bed, read her 3 stories instead of the usual 2, and tucked her in with extra kisses. Then I went to my study and waited. At 9:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. Text from James Patterson. Subject attempted to access trust documents remotely. Access denied. She's trying to figure out what happened. At 10:13 p.m., another text. She just called our office. Left a voicemail demanding to know why her portal access isn't working. Should I respond? I typed back, no. Let her wonder. At 10:35 p.m., I heard Caroline's voice rising from downstairs. She was on the phone, her tone sharp and angry. What do you mean there's a technical issue? I need those access codes tonight. This is unacceptable. I smiled. There was no technical issue. There was Protocol 33C, doing exactly what I designed it to do. Monday morning arrived with perfect irony. Caroline dressed in her power armor, the black Valentino suit, the Louboutin heels, the diamond tennis bracelet. She was preparing for her presentation to George, ready to spin her Miami vacation into a business triumph. You'll need to take Isabella to daycare, she said, gulping coffee. I have the board meeting at 9. No problem, I said. Good luck with the presentation. She gave me a distracted kiss and headed out the door. I watched her drive away, phone already pressed to her ear, probably calling Ryan to coordinate their stories. What Caroline didn't know was that George had received an email at 6 a.m. Not from me. I'd never be so obvious. From James Patterson, the trust administrator, exercising his fiduciary obligation to notify the trust's founder of a potential breach. The email included my 23-page report, every receipt, every falsified expense, every piece of evidence showing that George's daughter had been stealing from the company while sleeping with a vendor. I dropped Isabella at daycare, kissed her goodbye, and drove to my office at Hampton Aviation. I arrived at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before Caroline's presentation was scheduled to begin. My phone rang at 9:03 a.m. George's assistant, Mr. Sinclair, Mr. Hampton would like to see you in the executive conference room immediately. I'll be right there, I said. Time to watch my wife's world collapse. I was sitting in my office when George's assistant called me to the executive conference room. It was 9:17 a.m. Caroline's presentation had been scheduled to start at 9. Through my office window, I could see her in the hallway, checking her phone with increasing frustration. Nobody had told her the meeting was canceled. The conference room was on the top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Teterboro runway, where private jets took off and landed every few minutes. George sat at the head of the table. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. Our CFO, Patricia Kane, sat to his right, along with 2 senior board members I recognized from quarterly meetings. Thomas, George said quietly. He gestured to a chair. Sit down. I sat. On the table between us was a printed copy of my report. 23 pages of evidence that his daughter had been stealing from him while conducting an affair with one of our contractors. I read everything, George said. The expense reports, the hotel records, the timeline. He paused, his hand shaking slightly. Is this why you built Protocol 33C? Did you know she'd do this? No, sir, I said honestly. I built it because protecting family wealth requires protecting it from family. I never wanted to use it, but I designed it to work if I had to. Patricia spoke up. The trust freeze is already in effect. Caroline's access to all family holdings has been suspended pending board review. She doesn't know yet. One of the board members leaned forward. Thomas, I need to understand something. You're reporting your own wife. You're destroying your marriage. Why? Because she destroyed it first, I said. And because if I didn't report this and it came out later, every contract I've ever structured would be questioned. My professional integrity would be worthless. The company would be vulnerable. George's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his face tightened. It's Caroline. 4th time she's called. He let go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, my phone rang. Caroline. I showed George the screen. Answer it, he said. Speaker. I pressed accept. Caroline. Thomas. What the hell is going on? Her voice was sharp, stressed. The board meeting was canceled. Nobody's answering my calls. And I just try to access the trust portal, and it says my credentials are invalid. Where are you right now? I asked calmly. I'm in the lobby. Why? George stood up. His voice was cold when he spoke, loud enough for the phone to catch it. Tell her to come up. Conference room A. Now. I heard Caroline's sharp intake of breath through the phone. Dad? What's? Now, Caroline. George ended the call himself. We waited in silence. I could hear my own heartbeat. 2 minutes passed. Then the conference room door opened. Caroline walked in, her confident stride faltering when she saw the assembled group. Her eyes went to the report on the table, then to me, then to her father. Dad, what's this about? Why is Thomas here? Why are board members? George's voice shook when he spoke. Protocol 33C. You know what that is, Caroline? She blinked. No, Section 18F, Paragraph 7 of the Hampton Family Continuity Trust, I said quietly. Material fiduciary breach provisions. You signed the acknowledgement when you became a trust beneficiary. You just never read what it actually said. Her face went pale. Thomas, what did you do? George slid the report across the table. Read it. All of it. Then you can ask him what he did. Caroline's hands trembled as she picked up the report. I watched her eyes scan the first page. The executive summary listing 17 instances of expense fraud, documentation of her relationship with Ryan Mitchell, timeline of violations spanning 6 months. She looked up at me, her face a mixture of shock and rage. You had me followed? You spied on me. I protected the company, I said evenly. You gave me plenty of reasons to look closer. This is insane. She turned to her father. Dad, you can't seriously believe. Page 7. George said, his voice flat. The Seta Hotel, Miami Beach. 3 nights charged to Ryan Mitchell's corporate card. Explain that. Caroline's mouth opened, closed. She flipped to page 7, read it, and her face lost all color. There are photos, Patricia said quietly. Time-stamped. You and Mr. Mitchell entering the hotel separately. Elevator footage. Room service charges. You told me you were in Scottsdale, I said. Negotiating a G650 fleet deal. But there is no deal, is there? I checked with the client you claim to be meeting. They've never heard of any fleet expansion. Caroline's eyes flashed with fury. You contacted my clients. You sabotaged my deals. There are no deals to sabotage, I replied calmly. Just lies. She slammed the report on the table. You self-righteous bastard. You have no idea what it's like being married to you. No ambition, no excitement, just your boring contracts and your pathetic attempts to be relevant in a business you'll never understand. Caroline, George warned. But she was past caring. He's nobody, Dad. A paper pusher who happened to marry well. And now he's trying to destroy me because I found someone who actually understands what high-level business looks like. High-level business, I repeated softly. Is that what you call stealing from your father's company? Falsifying expense reports? Sleeping with contractors while billing it as client development? I built relationships. That's what business development means. Something you'd understand if you ever left your office. Did building relationships include the spa charges in Chicago? Patricia asked, consulting her own copy of the report. $400 billed as client entertainment. But the spa confirmed only one person used the services. You. Caroline's face flushed red. This is a witch hunt. This is consequences, George said heavily. He stood up, leaning on the table. His voice shook when he continued. Caroline, I gave you everything. A position in my company. Trust access. Authority. And you spat on it. You stole from me. You lied to me. You brought a vendor into your bed while he was billing us $500,000 for consulting services. Dad, I'm not finished. George's voice broke. Protocol 33C is now active. Your access to all trust assets is frozen. Your signature authority is revoked. Your position as Director of Business Development is suspended pending a full investigation. He paused, his face gray. And Thomas is right to report this. Because if he hadn't, and this came out later, the entire company would be at risk. Caroline stared at him, stunned. Then she turned to me. You planned this. You built that protocol years ago, just waiting for a chance to use it against me. No, I said quietly. I built it to protect what your father created. You're the one who triggered it. She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking with rage. This isn't over. I'll fight this. I'll get lawyers. You can't just freeze me out of my own family's money. Actually, I said, I can. You signed the trust documents. You agreed to the conflict of interest provisions. You violated them. The freeze is automatic and remains in effect until the board completes its review. She looked at her father one more time, maybe hoping he'd intervene. George just stared at her with devastated eyes. I want a divorce, Caroline said to me, her voice venomous. I assumed you would, I replied. My attorney will be in touch. She stormed out of the conference room. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, George sat down heavily. My God, Thomas. What exactly is your real job? Because you just dismantled my daughter's life with the precision of a surgeon. I didn't answer. The question was rhetorical anyway. 3 days after the confrontation, Caroline's lawyers made their first move. I received a demand letter in my office. 12 pages of legal threats wrapped in expensive letterhead. They wanted full restoration of her trust access, reinstatement to her position, and a formal apology from the board. They claimed Protocol 33C was invalid, that I'd manipulated George into signing documents he didn't understand, that the entire structure was designed to give me control over family assets. I read it twice, then forwarded it to James Patterson in Delaware along with a single question. Does this concern you? His reply came back in 10 minutes, not even slightly. The trust documents are ironclad. Her attorneys are fishing. Ignore them. But Caroline's legal team wasn't the real problem. The real problem arrived on Thursday morning when I got a call from our head of security, Robert Kane. Thomas, we've got a situation. Ryan Mitchell just tried to access the building. Said he had a meeting with Caroline about finalizing a lease agreement. I checked my watch. 9:47 a.m. Where is he now? Lobby. I told him Caroline no longer works here, but he's insisting the deal is already in progress. Says we owe him a commission on a G650 lease worth $2 million. I smiled grimly. I'll be right down. Ryan was pacing the lobby when I arrived. Phone pressed his ear. He was exactly as I remembered. Expensive suit, styled hair, the kind of swagger that came from closing deals on charm rather than substance. He ended his call when he saw me. Thomas Sinclair, he said, extending his hand like we were old friends. Good to see you again. I'm trying to track down Caroline. We've got a major deal closing and... There is no deal, I said, not taking his hand. And Caroline no longer has authority to negotiate contracts on behalf of Hampton Aviation. His smile faltered. I don't understand. We spent weeks putting this together. She told me the client was ready to sign. Which client? I asked. Silver Point Capital. They're looking to lease a fleet of G650s for executive transport. $25 million contract over 5 years. He pulled out his phone. I have emails from Caroline confirming the terms. Show me, I said. He handed me his phone. I scrolled through the messages. Caroline had indeed been promising him a massive deal, complete with detailed terms and commission structures. The only problem was that I'd already checked with Silver Point Capital 3 days ago. They had no idea what he was talking about. Mr. Mitchell, I said, handing back his phone, Silver Point Capital has confirmed they never discussed any fleet lease with Hampton Aviation. These emails from Caroline were fabrications. The color drained from his face. That's impossible. She showed me proposals, financial projections. She showed you what she wanted you to see. But none of it was real. I paused. Tell me, how much time did you spend working on this imaginary deal? 6 months. I turned down other opportunities because Caroline said this was guaranteed. His voice rose. I have expenses, travel costs, time invested. If there's no deal, I need compensation for it. You need to leave, I said flatly. This building, this company, and my wife's life. Because if you don't, I'll make sure every aviation broker in the industry knows you billed us $500,000 for consulting services while sleeping with a married client. His face went red. You can't threaten me. That's not a threat. It's a promise. I gestured to Robert. Please escort Mr. Mitchell out. He's no longer welcome here. Ryan looked like he wanted to argue, but Robert's hand on his shoulder convinced him otherwise. As security walked him to the door, Ryan turned back to me. She told me you were nobody, he said bitterly. Just a paper pusher who didn't understand real business. She was wrong, I said. About a lot of things. After he left, I called David. Ryan Mitchell just tried to claim a $2 million commission on a fake deal. I need you to document his relationship with Caroline. Every meeting, every expense, every lie. If he tries to sue for payment, I want evidence that destroys his credibility. Already on it, David said. But Thomas, you should know, Caroline's been making calls. She's trying to find allies on the board, people who will vote to overturn Protocol 33C. Let her try, I said. The trust documents don't allow board override without my consent. She can make all the calls she wants. That night, I sat with Isabella after her bath, reading her favorite story about a princess who saved herself. She fell asleep halfway through, her small hand wrapped around my thumb. I carried her to bed and stood in the doorway watching her breathe, thinking about how much her world was about to change. My phone buzzed. Text from George. Board meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m. Caroline's attorneys will present their case for overturning the freeze. Be prepared. I typed back. I will be. The board meeting felt like a trial. Caroline sat on one side of the conference table with her attorney, Richard Pemberton, a partner at one of Manhattan's most expensive divorce firms. On my side sat James Patterson from Delaware, along with Margaret Wolfe representing the trust's interests. George presided at the head of the table, looking older and grayer than I'd ever seen him. 5 other board members filled the remaining seats, people who'd known Caroline since she was a child, who'd watched her grow up in the business. Pemberton stood first. Gentlemen, we're here because Mr. Sinclair has weaponized a corporate document to punish his wife for a personal matter. Protocol 33C was never intended to freeze family members out of their rightful inheritance over a private relationship. It wasn't a private relationship, James Patterson replied calmly. It was a conflict of interest involving a company vendor who billed Hampton Aviation for services while conducting an affair with an officer of the company. That's textbook fiduciary breach. My client made an error in judgment, Pemberton said, but the punishment is wildly disproportionate. You're denying her access to assets she's entitled to as a family member. She's entitled to assets held in trust, James corrected, and that trust has explicit provisions governing beneficiary conduct. She violated those provisions. The freeze is automatic. Caroline spoke up, her voice controlled but tight. Dad, this is Thomas punishing me because our marriage failed. He's using your company as a weapon. George didn't respond. He just looked at me. I stood up. May I present additional evidence? George nodded. I placed a folder on the table. This morning, Ryan Mitchell attempted to collect a $2 million commission on a fleet lease that doesn't exist. He had emails from Caroline promising the deal was guaranteed. When I contacted the supposed client, Silver Point Capital, they confirmed they never discussed any lease with us. I opened the folder, revealing printouts of the email chain. Caroline spent 6 months creating an elaborate fiction to keep Ryan engaged. She fabricated proposals, financial projections, client interest, all to maintain the relationship while billing the company for her time. Pemberton interrupted. This is speculation. Caroline was developing a legitimate business opportunity that simply didn't materialize. Then why did she tell Ryan the deal was closing the same week she was suspended? I asked. Why promise him a commission on a contract that supposedly fell through months ago? Silence. I continued. Because she needed him to believe he had a financial stake in staying with her. When the affair couldn't be sustained on romance alone, she used false business prospects to keep him interested. One of the board members, Harold Vance, cleared his throat. Thomas, are you saying Caroline committed fraud against this man to maintain an extramarital relationship? I'm saying she misrepresented company business to a vendor while engaging in an undisclosed relationship with him. Whether that constitutes fraud is for lawyers to decide, but it definitely constitutes a fiduciary breach. Caroline's face was pale. That's not. I was still working on the Silver Point deal. It just needed more time. I spoke with Silver Point CEO yesterday, I said. They've never heard of you. The room went quiet. The board voted unanimously to uphold Protocol 33C. Caroline's freeze remained in effect indefinitely. Her attorney filed for an emergency injunction in New York Supreme Court, but the judge took one look at the trust documents and dismissed the case. George's estate planning had been too thorough, my drafting too precise. 2 weeks after the board meeting, the dominoes really started falling. Ryan Mitchell sued Hampton Aviation for $2 million, claiming breach of contract and fraudulent inducement. His lawsuit lasted exactly 9 days before our attorneys buried him in evidence. Emails proving he'd billed inflated hours, hotel records showing he'd spent company money on personal expenses, and testimony from 3 other brokers confirming he'd had inappropriate relationships with married clients before. He settled for nothing and signed a non-disclosure agreement to avoid having the full story go public. Then came the criminal investigation. The expense fraud Caroline had committed wasn't just a violation of company policy. It was wire fraud, potentially a federal offense. When the board turned over evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office, prosecutors started building a case. Caroline's lawyers negotiated frantically, trying to avoid indictment. In the end, she accepted a plea deal. 18 months in a minimum security facility for wire fraud and filing false business records. The judge was surprisingly harsh during sentencing, noting that Caroline had violated the trust of both her family and her employer while in a position of significant authority. I attended the sentencing with George. Caroline looked small in her navy suit, nothing like the confident woman who'd smirked about high-level business. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she looked directly at me. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for everything." I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late to matter. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. I got full custody of Isabella, with Caroline granted supervised visitation once per month after her release. The judge had been clear. A mother serving time for defrauding her own family wasn't getting unsupervised access to a young child. George restructured the trust entirely, removing Caroline as a beneficiary and establishing a new educational trust for Isabella with me as the sole trustee. The company continued operating without missing a beat. Turns out Caroline's irreplaceable business development role could be handled quite effectively by a team of 3 junior associates. Ryan Mitchell disappeared from the aviation industry. Last I heard, he was selling timeshares in Florida. Isabella asked about her mother sometimes. I told her the truth in terms a 4-year-old could understand. Mommy made some bad choices and needed to go away for a while to think about them. She accepted this with the resilience children have, and her world kept spinning. George offered me the position of chief operating officer, but I declined. I liked what I did, building structures, protecting assets, making sure the architecture held firm when storms hit. Some people are meant to be visible. I was meant to be the foundation. 14 months after Caroline's sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of our new home in Mendham, watching Isabella play in the backyard. We'd moved out of the house in Bernardsville. Too many memories, too much history. This place was smaller, quieter hours. George had passed away 6 months earlier. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, exactly as the doctors had predicted. He'd spent his final weeks making peace with what his daughter had done and ensuring Isabella would be protected forever. His revised will left the controlling interest in Hampton Aviation in a trust managed by a 3-person board. I was one of the trustees. The company was thriving. We'd acquired 2 smaller leasing firms and expanded our fleet by 30%. The industry had weathered the scandal surprisingly well. Turned out that demonstrating you'd fire your own family for fraud was a powerful message about corporate integrity. Caroline had been released 4 months ago after serving her sentence. She tried to rebuild her relationship with Isabella, but the supervised visits were awkward and stilted. Our daughter was polite but distant, calling her Caroline instead of Mommy. Time and choices had consequences. I'd started dating again. Nothing serious yet, just coffee with a woman named and who worked in compliance at a pharmaceutical company. She appreciated the irony of 2 compliance officers trying to have a normal conversation without discussing regulatory frameworks. We were taking it slow. Isabella ran up to the back door, holding a dandelion. "Daddy, look, I made a wish." "What did you wish for?" I asked, kneeling down to her level. "I can't tell you, or it won't come true." She giggled and ran back outside. I watched her go, this little girl who'd inherited her grandfather's stubborn streak and, I hoped, none of her mother's capacity for deception. She was happy, stable, safe. That's what mattered. My phone buzzed. Text from James Patterson. "Trust quarterly review is ready. Hampton Aviation up 23% YOY. Isabella's education fund now at $4.2 million. You built something that lasts, Thomas." I smiled and typed back. We all did. The irony wasn't lost on me. Caroline had mocked my work as boring, irrelevant, beneath the excitement of high-level business. But boring work, careful planning, precise documentation, structural integrity, had protected everything when her excitement collapsed into chaos. That evening, I tucked Isabella into bed and read her favorite story. She fell asleep holding my hand, secure in a world that wouldn't betray her. Protocol 33C had done its job, not with drama or fireworks, but with the quiet efficiency of a well-designed system executing exactly as intended. Caroline had triggered the mechanism, and the mechanism had protected what mattered most. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply letting someone face the consequences of their own choices while you rebuild something better from the rubble they left behind. I turned off Isabella's light and closed the door softly. Tomorrow we go to the park. Maybe call and see if she wanted to join us. Life moved forward, one careful step at a time, and the foundation I'd built held strong.